Hallo, ich bin Anton, Anton Weiß. Mein Großvater war ein Österreicher und ich bin in Russland geboren und jetzt komme ich aus Israel und ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, but not nearly enough to have a talk about DevOps and especially DevOps culture, which is a pity. I think German is a beautiful language. Ooh. Okay, I'll keep talking. What happened? Okay. Okay, I hope this won't do this anymore. Okay, so a few more words about me. I've been building and delivering software for the last 15 years. I worked at a couple of large enterprise companies such as BMC and AT&T and a bunch of startups. And for the last year, I've been building this consulting company called Automato, where what we do is helping customers with doing their DevOps thing, or basically enabling effective software delivery. This is the link to the company site, my Twitter handle, my LinkedIn profile. Please feel free to connect. I like to have new friends. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about? You see, 5-6 years ago when we started having these DevOps conferences, DevOps meetups, DevOps days back in Israel, a question would often come up about how to get management buy-in, how to persuade the management that this DevOps thing is valid, something good for the business, good for the company. Now, 5 years fast forward, and we suddenly have customers coming to us, and the customers are the top managers or maybe middle managers that got some task from their top managers, asking us how do we do this DevOps transformation all across our organization? How do we get engineers on board with this DevOps thing? So we now suddenly have totally different questions to find answers for. You see, DevOps was born as a grassroots movement. Some speak of DevOps as a revolution. And like any revolution, it was born out of despair. Yeah. It was like a brushwood pile of despair over the pains and inefficiencies of the old ways of working that we all knew were in place. And then there was a spark of creativity that led the brighter minds among us to rethink this modus operandi that we're all used to and realize there's a better way. Now, when we talk about DevOps, the question of its relationship with Agile comes up often. Now, who here is doing Agile? Okay, for how long? 2, 3 years, 5 years? Okay, how do you feel about it? Okay, some are good, some are probably a bit less positive. Well, we'll keep doing this. Huh? Okay. Well, the thing is that Agile in itself, regarding the DevOps and Agile, okay, some say that DevOps is a continuation of Agile or an extension of it, right? They say that Agile didn't take the operations into account, and that's why DevOps was needed. There's at least one explanation to that. You see, Agile in itself was a revolution, right? It had the Agile manifesto. It had all those noble ideas of communication, collaboration, humanity inscribed on its flags. But as it happens with many revolutionary ideas, with time, Agile got institutionalized, formalized, and eventually translated into the today widely known methodologies such as Scrum, SAFe, various other implementations. Now, in a way, this was a blessing for all the new adepts, for all the managers that realized that there was a potential there to make their organizations more effective, more fast. But it was a mixed blessing because the frameworks seemed to promise you to have Agile in a few easy steps, but we know that when transforming human organizations, there is no such thing as one-size-fits-all recipe. There's no few easy steps. And secondly, as with any institutionalization, in many cases this resulted in a very formalistic approach, whereas quite adversely, processes and tools got valued over humans and their interactions, and backlog grooming became more important than working software. I'm sure this rings a bell with at least some of you. This is a picture that talks about Agile implementation, how many concepts there are, and you don't see any of the words related to the Agile manifesto here in all this tag, all this cloud of words, okay? So in a way, this led to Agile becoming the opposite of what it was meant to be, which led to many software engineers in the last 10 years who I talked to express their sincere disbelief in Agile being anyhow valid. Some were saying it's just a meaningless game, and some were even going as far as saying that Agile is actually a manipulative mechanism meant to make engineers feel powerless and to bend their will and professional judgment in favor of short-term business goals. This is like a true quote from an engineer I talked to. Okay, so how do we take this experience and learn from it when we're doing DevOps? DevOps is probably related to Agile, but it's not the same. For one, there is no framework. There are some guiding principles. There are the tools, of course, continuous delivery, containers, infrastructure as code, and the architectural patterns such as microservices, feature toggling, loose coupling. But these are only the tools. And if you've been doing any reading on DevOps lately, you've probably heard of columns, right? Yeah, anywhere? Okay, anyway, columns is an acronym that was originally coined by Damon Edwards and John Willis, who are both speaking here at the conference, and I'm really privileged to be sharing the stage with these guys because they're the real DevOps thought leaders. And so they've defined this, which stands for culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing as the cornerstones of DevOps. Okay, so if we go back to the tools and processes, we'll realize they only give us automation, measurement, and maybe some of the leanness, okay, which gives us only the ALM out of the columns, okay? It doesn't give us neither culture nor sharing. In a way, this is interesting because ALM is another acronym which stands for Application Lifecycle Management, a term that was there before DevOps. Okay, so how do we make sure we're not only implementing ALM and falling into the same trap of formalistic approach that happened in many Agile implementations? How do we enable culture and sharing? So let's say you're a manager and you want to transform your organization into working in a more DevOps way. And you know there's a trap, okay? And you know that the way to get out of the trap is by enabling culture and sharing. So the question now again becomes, how the hell do you go about this? Can we maybe tell our engineers to just go and be more cooperative and more compassionate and more innovative? Would be so easy and so nice if you could just tell people, go cooperate. And they'll listen, yeah, okay, we'll cooperate, okay. Leave us alone. Okay, it doesn't work this way. Well, no, it doesn't work this way because cooperation, creativity, compassion, they're not mechanical actions, but instead they're driven by emotion. And emotion doesn't get activated on instruction. In order to activate emotion, you need to be able to inspire and motivate. So how do we do this? Can we maybe just pay our engineers more for being more creative, or fire them for not being compassionate enough, or maybe pay bonuses to devs for doing more experiments, or pay bonuses to ops for having more empathy? How do we create this culture of experimentation and sharing that's the third way of DevOps as defined by Gene Kim? Well, according to the title of the presentation, you can guess that my answer is leadership, okay? You may say this is a trick answer, because you're asking me how do we enable something intangible and hard to define, such as culture, and I'm just giving you another intangible, hard to define concept such as leadership. Well, first of all, as David Wheeler famously said, any problem in computer science can be solved by another level of indirection. And I think we can totally relate the problems of IT organizations to the field of computer science. So in this case, specifically for large organizational transformations, which DevOps is, I certainly believe that leadership is the answer. And when you think about it, leadership may be not that hard, because actually social sciences have been studying leadership for the last couple of centuries. It's not a new thing we need to invent right now. And in fact, we can even run through all the major leadership theories that were defined in the last couple of centuries in less than 5 minutes, okay? So, and yeah, my presentation is heavy on quotes, I know. So, as Kurt Lewin, the renowned psychologist, once said, there's nothing as practical as a good theory. So bear with me, we'll go on a trip of 9 major leadership theories in 5 minutes. This was inspired by a YouTube video by Professor Zigarelli. Let's start. Okay, so first, a long time ago, at the dawn of the leadership studies, there was the great man theory. This basically said that in order to be a great leader, you need to be born this way, okay? Great leaders are born, they're not made. You either have it or you do not. Now go apply this. Not very practical, right? So the scientists realized that this theory doesn't give them anything to work on, and they started trying to elaborate and finding what are the actual character traits that belong to these great men. Which led to the next theory, which was called the trait theory of leadership, which basically said, be like this or be like that, be strong, brave, whatever, and people will follow you. The problem with that approach was that the scientists, no matter how they tried, they couldn't find a definitive, concise set of character traits, because somehow each leader happened to be a little bit different. So this led scientists to seeking for a more down-to-earth, more practical approach, and gave birth to the skills theory of leadership. This basically said you need 3 sets of skills in order to be able to lead. You need to have technical skills in your field so that you have credibility, okay? You need to understand what you're doing. You need to have human skills, of course, like persuasion, diplomacy, affability. And you need to have conceptual skills for the strategic vision, for seeing the big picture. So if you learn all this, you can be a great leader. But then another theory came along, and it said, no, you don't need to learn specific skills, because each leader has their own style. One leads by being autocratic and demanding. Another leads by being democratic and participative. And still another leader may assume a laissez-faire approach, meaning leave the people alone and let them do the work, just stand aside, don't interfere. Probably the best known application of the leadership style theory is something that's called managerial grid. Those of you who studied management probably heard of it. It basically says, assume an approach where you are very demanding on performance, uncompromising, but on the other hand, you're very people-oriented and open. Easier said than done, I think. Anyway, this in turn has led to the next theory, which was called situational leadership theory, which argued that there are different situations in life. Yeah? And for each situation, you need to be leading differently. So if we take this back, for example, to our field, that would mean that you'll probably need to be more of a disciplinarian leader for a crazy startup bunch, and maybe more of an inspirational leader for the burnt out and disillusioned corporate IT crowd. I certainly like this one. We'll get back to it later. But then another theory came along that said, because situational theory, it suggests that the situations are static and leaders can adapt in order to lead in every given situation. Whereas the contingency theory said that the leaders are also static, so the leader cannot really adapt. You need to replace the leader if he doesn't fit the situation, okay? Next up, we have two theories which we'll look at together because they can be seen as opposites. First, there's the transactional leadership theory, which implies that people follow based on incentives in place. Quite simple. Okay, so the leader's job is finding that right mix between awards and punishments, okay, and then just monitoring what happens, okay, if this mix works or it does not. Transformational leadership theory, by contrast, says that the leader shouldn't gain commitment and buy-in so much from the quid pro quo approach as from caring for his followers, encouraging them, and inspiring them towards a vision. In short, it says that the transformational leaders get results by gradually transforming the environment and the relationship and cultivating followership rather than paying for it or punishing for non-compliance, as the transactional model implies. And last but not least, we have the servant leadership theory that can be seen as a mix between the transactional and the transformational approach. This says that if the leader makes a priority of identifying and meeting the followers' needs, of serving them instead of expecting to be served, then this leader creates an environment of trust and cooperation and reciprocal service and ultimately higher performance. Okay, so these were the theories, okay? Went through them quite fast. Now the question that's important for us is how do we take this back to DevOps? Because a theory must be applied. Well, what I definitely believe that the first lesson we should learn is from the situational leadership theory. We first need to evaluate our situation. For example, for greenfield projects or for small startups, definitely skill-based leadership works fine. The relatively small scale and complexity will allow a skill-based leader to be in control of both the technical implementation and the human relationships and the strategic vision. And it works great, okay? But the greenfield projects are not the real challenge, because the real benefits of DevOps come into play when applied to large organizations. Large organizations that were mostly originally not built with DevOps principles in mind. Large organizations in need of transformation. So in order to help those managers that are struggling to find what they need to do first when enabling DevOps in their organizations, what we try to do, what we try to do is compile a short list of the 4 roles for DevOps leadership. So first, as I said, this is a transformation. So you certainly need to have a transformation leader in place. The transformational leader is a culture builder, so it does take us somehow to square one. How do we enable culture? Now, I believe that culture is not that hard, because if you take it, strip it to its bare essentials, culture is just a story you tell. So you need to work on your DevOps story, okay? And there are pretty simple rules of storytelling that you can look up on the internet. And of course, you should read books and go to conferences and learn from others. But in the end, the DevOps story that you tell has to be your own authentic story that's applicable to your organization only. It has to be believable. And you, as the leader, as the manager, have to become the part of this story. Now, not everybody is a good storyteller. So if you can tell the story yourself, you should probably find someone in your organization who can help you tell that story, or maybe hire a consultant. The Bible tells us about Moses, who had this strong belief that his people should be free, but he wasn't very good at speaking. So in order to communicate this message, he asked his brother Aaron, who was good at speaking, to help him tell the story. Okay, so this is the first role of leadership in DevOps, or probably in any transformation, be able to tell the story. Okay, now once you've got people to believe the story, you need to provide them with the safety to experiment. Yeah, we're all talking about this. Fault tolerance. Because the reason why we are reluctant to take a step is the fear of stumbling. And the road to improvement is never a straight path. There will be failures, we all know that. And if we fail, we need the leader to be there for us, to support us if we fall. This is if we look back to the theories, this is the servant leader, the one who is ready to sacrifice for us instead of sacrificing us. So this is the second role, be the safeguard. But while transformational and servant leadership is important, I think they're a necessity. They should come first. They're not enough, because at the end of the day, we need to be generating value, right? And in order to generate value, we need to do work. And in DevOps, this work is being done, at least ideally, in small autonomous teams that are independent, that are self-organizing. Now the question becomes, how do we coordinate this? What we found working is you need to build something that I like to call the kernel team, okay? You remember I was talking about how in small startups the skill-based leaders work fine. So we actually, what we want to achieve in a large organization is that each team is like a startup, is as fast, as agile as your best startup out there, because if that doesn't happen, then that startup will come and eventually steal your engineers, and then maybe your business. So at that level, I still believe at a large organization also we need those skill-based professionals that are able to hold the technical implementation and the human relationships and the strategic vision. Now, this should be a team of professionals that is incentivized and supported in order to cooperate effectively, in order to coordinate their actions, and in return they will provide feedback according to where organization is moving and where it should be probably going, back to the high leadership. Okay, so this is role number 3, build the kernel team. And for role number 4, I'd like to talk about your famous compatriot, Martin Luther. He was a great reformator, okay? A controversial figure. For one, he was anti-Semite, which I certainly cannot approve of. But still, a very significant, probably the most significant figure in the Protestant Reformation. Now, he wasn't the first guy there who realized that the Catholic Church is doing things wrong. So how did he become so important? How did he become that leading figure and eventually gave birth to Lutheranism? Well, the answer, at least the answer I found, is mass communication, right? You see, his most seminal work was called 59 Theses, and it was a pamphlet that outlined the way that Catholic Church is only focused around selling indulgences to the people, while what Luther said is that to be a good Christian, actually, you don't need to buy anything from anyone, you just need to believe in God. Sounds natural, but was pretty revolutionary at that stage, I suppose. And again, he wasn't the first guy to talk about this, but what he did is take this pamphlet and use technology. He used the printing press invented by another famous compatriot of yours, Johannes Gutenberg, and he printed out his pamphlet and he distributed it, and it spread all around Germany and then all around Europe, and eventually has caused the Reformation in the church. It has caused change. So how does this translate back to what we're doing? I believe that one of the first things that the leadership should be doing is become the communication enabler. Actually, the talk by Marco from GitHub exemplified this very, very brightly. You need to provide these new communication channels. Marshall McLuhan famously said that the medium becomes the message. So if you want to bring the message of change, you need to change the media of communication. And it has to be the media that feels natural to modern engineers. And modern engineers, yes, they are used to work on GitHub and on Slack and on HipChat and whatever else. Now, what we see happening in many places is that the leadership allows these channels of communication to happen, but they're not part of it. Like, we see engineers communicating on Slack, but the managers are nowhere to be seen. The decisions are taken in the offices. So the management not only has to enable these communication channels, just as governments are responsible for roads and electrical lines, we want our leadership to be responsible for these communication channels and to be part of them. So this is role number 4, become the communication enabler. Choose a tool and promote it and be the active user of it, and eventually this will cause change. Okay, so this is the 4 roles that we've seen working best for starting on the DevOps journey at large organizations. This is probably not the full list. Maybe some of the things will not apply to what you're doing. Maybe you'll find some of your own. I wanted to compile a short list because I have bad memory and short attention span, so I have problems with long lists. But if you want something longer, you can probably look up this. Dr. Deming's 14 points for management. Dr. Deming is seen by some as kind of a godfather figure for the DevOps movement. And his list has a lot more. But I like to start small. And I think for the beginning, the 4 roles that we've built are a very, very good start. Okay, now, first of all, I want to thank you for listening. And there's one more thing I want to say. Going on the DevOps journey and arriving at the goals are not the same. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that an isolated system, that entropy or disorder always escalates in an isolated system, and that a system cannot increase its order without an external influence. So I believe while you go down the DevOps road, the role of leadership will have to shift. Okay, so if in the beginning the leadership should be the forming and the driving force behind the transformation, With time, the leadership has to become the channel of communication between what's happening inside the organization and what's happening outside of the organization. We've been speaking about this yesterday at the speakers' dinner about how open sourcing your stuff can improve your company's hiring capabilities. This is seen everywhere. Like, for example, Prometheus, yeah? Some of you heard the talk about Prometheus today. It's made by SoundCloud. Makes me want to go and work for SoundCloud. But it's even more than that. It's not only the hiring capabilities, it's also something that will influence your company culture with time. So, but this is a subject for a whole another talk. So with this, I'd like to wish you all good luck on your DevOps journey. And trust me, it will be more fun the further you go along, because if DevOps is not making our life more fun, if it's not making our professional life more enjoyable, then what is it good for? Thank you.